Now we turn to our final speakers for the proposition opposition. Our final speaker in proposition is Beatrice Coulter. Beatrice is a second-year undergraduate student reading history at Corpus Christi College. They won the right to speak through open audition. Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm really proud and honored to be here. Sorry, there are a lot of people here and I'm just mentally readjusting. So I'd like to we've talked a lot today about the NHS, funding crises, etc. But I don't want to do that in my speech. I want to talk about how the health system itself is designed to serve the needs of some people, and some communities in particular, particularly my community, the trans community. And I know I say that and suddenly this chamber goes fucking nuts, but sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But I feel like regardless of how you feel on this issue, we can all agree that trans people deserve quick access to good quality healthcare. Yeah, thank you. One of the most interesting things to me about the controversial closure of the Tavistock Clinic is how trans and gender critical people have been collectively dancing on its grave. It was for different reasons, but I do think that this is a point where both groups are aligned. So I'd like to talk today about how that isn't happening. So many of you will not know what it's like to be trans. And so I'm not going to frame my discussion on this issue through a personal experience you're never going to have. I'm going to talk about it through the lens of a sibling, or if you're an only child, a best friend. What if they come out as trans? What is that system going to look like for them? Well, okay, so for most care with the NHS system, for example, if you're a cisgender woman looking to get HRT because you're going through a bad menopause, you schedule an appointment with your GP, and then usually after talking with them about symptoms, why you're feeling this way, etc., you should be able to get a prescription. If not, this is actually changing very soon. Hopefully, you should be able to get it in pharmacies soon enough. However, this isn't true. If your friend is a trans woman and you want an estrogen prescription, you're going to have to talk to your GP. They'll ask you the usual questions. When did you start feeling this way? What's your history? Yada, yada, yada. They will then refer you to a gender identity clinic where, they act as the sort of hub for trans healthcare. So you're referred to a clinic, and then if you want surgery, if you want hormones, if you want vocal training, that all acts through there. And after some waiting, we'll get back to this, they will have an appointment with someone at the GIC clarifying what care they want. Then another appointment, which this is usually more of an assessment, seeing are you actually trans, do you qualify for gender under the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and then if they want hormones, they'll then be referred to an endocrinologist, and then after an appointment with those, you'll finally walk out of the appointment with a prescription, and then after that point, because you're on this medication for the rest of your life, that will then be liaised with your GP. As I say this, you might already start to be noticing some problems, even in theory, even in an ideal world. So for any other care you'll need, so if you want surgery, even after you've had hormones, that's also going to go through, you'll also have to get another appointment with the GIC. And there are technically pilot programs. However, I genuinely did not know they existed until I was researching the speech. So if I don't know, then I'm sure many other people in my community do not. Now, for those who say the system benefits trans people because we need specialist care, I personally doubt this, even in theory. For example, if I've already been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, why can I not just get a referral for a surgery straight from the GIC? Why do we need to keep going back to the clinics? Why can't my GP just refer for me? And also, I know lots of trans people who self-medicate, and they do this without medical degrees. I really think this is something that can be done. Now, the system is also incredibly expensive. The reason why I'm focusing so much on the design of the system is that the rough spending of GICs has roughly doubled in the last 10 years. In 2010, about £10 million was spent on it. Now it's about 20. This is mainly to help deal with capacity. However, as my speech will lay out, this isn't really working. This money is not really going anywhere. So I want to talk about so I've talked about the theory. Here's roughly how the system works for someone who's never involved with it. Now I'm going to go through step by step how this systemically fails trans patients. Now, firstly, GPs may not refer to you in the first place because of bigotry or misunderstanding or not really knowing what to do. This is exacerbated, particularly if you're a person of color, if you have many mental illnesses and you are non-binary. Secondly, the assessments for gender dysphoria are, to put it simply, awful. At the assessment, they will ask, the regular questions as the GP would have done before. When did you realize? When did you come out? How are your parents coping? What's your sexuality? Yada, yada, yada. But the reality is, because this is your one appointment to get healthcare and they can deny you, you're going to lie. You're going to change yourself into saying, this is who I am, this is what I've done. We don't do this for other procedures. Why do we have to do it for this one? And also, just generally, I'd like for a second to imagine our great dear president. If you have intense scrotal pain, you don't need to go to see a psychological assessment to prove that. But let's imagine you do. If you did, and you needed an orchidectomy, which is, what we do to dogs, but for humans, before you have to go, and you have an assessment, you have to have assessment of exactly how was it. You're going to be asked demeaning questions about your childhood, and in particular, your sexuality. I personally have been asked in an assessment, do I masturbate? What do I masturbate to? Am I a virgin? And these were still seen as okay. I've talked to countless trans people where their questions went even worse. And funnily enough, the easiest part of all this is the endocrinologist. They understand what they're doing. They're like, here's what you need to do. And then, they'll let you and your sibling walk out with a prescription. And also, I'd like to talk about, so that's just for the pathway to getting hormones. And that's, pretty base, that's a pretty surface level, thing, right? However, for other services, there's inadequacy at almost every step. So, for example, there are some services which other countries provide, which the NHS just doesn't. A big one is facial feminization surgery. If you don't know what that is, it's to help trans women pass better as cisgender women. And knowing people, this surgery has genuinely, it can mean the difference between getting assaulted on the street and not. So this is an essential service which the NHS just isn't offering. And the crazy thing is we've been talking a lot about how bad the US system. At least in the US, if you have good insurance and you harangue a bit, you can actually get FFS through the American system, which genuinely seems like everyone in this chamber hates. And this isn't even taking into account that oftentimes care can sometimes go in and out of the system. For example, I'm going to be talking a bit about bottom surgery for trans men, which is when they help reconstruct a penis. So this is a very complicated story with lots of moving parts, but to summarize very basically, on the 31st of March 2020, the contract for these surgeries to take place expired because they didn't properly contract with the hospital. Then, radio silence for a year and a half. And for context, these surgeries are complex. They require multiple surgeries and multiple complex surgeries. And patients who had been going through them, they just stopped for 18 months. And whenever they tried to get more information, they were brushed off. They were like, we don't really know, sorry. I personally find that unacceptable. And the NHS has yet to formally apologize for that break. And so I said at the start that I'd come back to waiting times, so now I will. Waiting times are by far the worst part of this whole system. We've been talking a lot about healthcare that should be free at point of care or point of need. I take issue with the idea that the healthcare is being offered to trans patients at the point of care at all. For example, if you want to talk about waiting times, this is something I have personal experience with. For example, I am currently on the waiting list for a gender identity clinic in London. I am on a waiting list with 13,000 other trans patients. They are currently accepting referrals from January of 2018. That's when Theresa May was still in power. And there's another clinic which has which is supposed to cover all of the west of England, has stopped accepting patients full stop. And this pain, the pain of having to wait, of putting your life in limbo, is real. Because coming out to a GP can be a very tough process because of the aforementioned bigotry. Because, let's be honest here, Britain is not the most tolerant society for transgender people right now. So imagine coming up with that courage. The GP finally going, okay, I'll refer you. You might get a letter, you might not. I didn't get my referral letter until 3 months after I was technically referred. And honestly, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm at Cambridge. I'm, a member of this university. This has honestly allowed me to have the resources and stability to have private healthcare. But that's just, thank you. And let's be real here. The private system is just as bad. There are also extensive waiting lists, and also this tends to exacerbate existing inequalities. For example, to go on hormones, that'll take roughly about £1,000. And, because of aforementioned bigotry, trans patients don't really have that sort of money lying around. This leads to, honestly, just hell. If you'll allow me to say out loud something I've never told anyone else, the real reason why I left Twitter wasn't because of the blatant and horrible trans misogyny I experienced on there. It was because I couldn't get over the extensive guilt I saw after seeing GoFundMe after GoFundMe after GoFundMe after GoFundMe for British transgender people, not even in the States, right here, and I saw them failing. And honestly, as I was trying to embark on my own journey, that taxed on me. That's something I've had to deal with a lot, the fact that I am one of the lucky ones. And honestly, let's just say someone you know can't afford it, and they've tried to GoFundMe and it fails, and you're stuck on a waiting list, knowing that you have years and years and years ahead of waiting ahead of you. Because if I'm being completely honest with you, I have emailed Labour to see what their opinions on this, if they should come into power, if they're going to change the system. They are not planning to. And I genuinely don't see the Tories changing the system either. So if you're stuck on that waiting list, knowing you have years ahead, what do? You wait and you suffer. And I had a conversation with one of my closest friends in the world about this problem. How the NHS systemically cannot meet the needs of our people. How the system feels like it's lacking compassion in us. How the NHS is destroying our community. And later that week, because she couldn't get access to care, I found out she killed herself. And I want to say I was shocked, but I wasn't. And I would like to say that I agree with the first proposition speaker, that the NHS does perfectly seem to reflect the values of British society. Thank you so much for listening.